Welcome to Untold Stories of Freddie Mercury. If this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe and let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. And now, let's dive into today's unforgettable story. In the autumn of 1991, as golden leaves danced outside the windows of Garden Lodge, Freddie Mercury's Kensington mansion, the world's greatest rock star, was quietly preparing for his final performance. But this wasn't a stage he would command with his legendary presence, nor an audience he would mesmerize with his four-octave voice. This was perhaps the most intimate and heartbreaking performance of his entire life, writing a letter that would forever change the lives of three men who had shared nearly 2 decades of musical magic with him. The house felt different that October morning. The usual energy that pulsed through its walls whenever Freddie was creating had been replaced by something more profound, more sacred. His beloved cats wandered the corridors as they always did, but even they seemed to sense the weight of what was happening in the upstairs study. Freddie had always been a man of grand gestures, theatrical flourishes, and dramatic declarations, but on this particular day, he sat at his antique writing desk with nothing but a simple pen and paper. His hands, once so powerful as they gripped microphone stands and commanded stadium crowds, now trembled slightly as he contemplated the blank page before him. The same hands that had written Bohemian Rhapsody and We Are the Champions were about to craft something far more personal, far more devastating. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who had spent his career avoiding personal revelations in interviews was now preparing to bare his soul completely. The morning light filtered through the heavy curtains, casting long shadows across the room filled with memories. Gold and platinum records lined the walls, each one representing a triumph, a moment of pure creative ecstasy shared with Brian, Roger, and John. But today, those achievements felt like echoes from another lifetime. What mattered now was finding the right words to say goodbye to the three men who had been more than bandmates. They had been his brothers, his creative soulmates, his family. Freddie's mind wandered to their early days, cramped in tiny recording studios, arguing passionately about harmonies and arrangements. He remembered Brian's meticulous attention to guitar layers, Roger's explosive energy behind the drums, and John's quiet but essential bass lines that held everything together. They had been 4 very different personalities, who somehow created something magical when they came together. The chemistry had been instant, undeniable, and had sustained them through nearly 20 years of incredible highs and devastating lows. As he finally touched pen to paper, Freddie felt the weight of everything unsaid over the years. The music industry had always demanded a certain distance, a professional facade, but now there was no need for pretense. His diagnosis had stripped away all the unnecessary layers, leaving only truth. He thought about all the times he had wanted to tell them how much they meant to him, how their friendship had been the one constant in a life filled with chaos and excess. The letter began to take shape, each word carefully chosen, each sentence a small piece of his heart. He wrote about gratitude, not just for the music they had created together, but for the way they had accepted him completely, never judging his lifestyle or his choices. He wrote about regret, for the times his ego had gotten in the way, for the arguments that seemed so important then but felt trivial now. Most importantly, he wrote about love, the deep, unspoken bond that had held Queen together through everything. Outside, London continued its daily rhythm, unaware that one of its greatest sons was penning what would become one of the most heartbreaking documents in rock history. The letter that would soon rest in the hands of Brian May, Roger Taylor, and John Deacon would carry within it the essence of a man who had given everything to his art and was now giving everything to his friends. The weight of the pen in Freddie's hand seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment as he continued crafting his final message to Queen. The study around him held decades of memories, photographs from their greatest triumphs, handwritten lyrics scattered across surfaces, and the faint scent of his favorite cologne mixing with the autumn air that drifted through slightly opened windows. But none of these familiar comforts could ease the profound sadness that settled in his chest as he realized this would be the last time he would communicate with his bandmates as their leader, their friend, their Freddie. His thoughts drifted to Brian May, the brilliant astrophysicist who had traded the stars for stage lights and had never looked back. Freddie remembered their first meeting, how Brian's quiet intensity had immediately impressed him. Over the years, Brian had become his closest collaborator, the one who could translate Freddie's wildest musical visions into reality. Their creative partnership had produced some of Queen's most beloved songs, born from late-night sessions where they would push each other to explore new territories. Brian's guitar had become the voice that sang alongside Freddie's vocals, creating harmonies that seemed to touch something divine. In the letter, Freddie found himself writing about those magical moments when Brian would play a riff that perfectly captured what Freddie had been hearing in his head but couldn't express. He wrote about Brian's unwavering loyalty, how he had always stood by Queen even when the music industry tried to pigeonhole them or dismiss their theatrical approach. Most importantly, he wrote about Brian's gentle nature, how beneath the rock star exterior lived a man of profound kindness and intellectual curiosity who had enriched Freddie's life in countless ways. Then his mind turned to Roger Taylor, the drummer whose explosive energy had provided Queen's heartbeat for nearly 2 decades. Roger had always been the wild card, the one who brought an edge of danger and unpredictability to their sound. Freddie smiled slightly as he remembered Roger's fierce independence, how he had never been afraid to challenge Freddie's ideas or push back when he disagreed. That tension had created some of their best work, forcing all of them to dig deeper and reach higher. Writing about Roger brought back memories of their most intense recording sessions, when Roger's perfectionism would drive them all to the brink of exhaustion, but ultimately result in something extraordinary. Freddie wrote about Roger's hidden sensitivity, how beneath the rock and roll bravado lived someone who cared deeply about their music and their friendship. He wrote about Roger's voice, how his high harmonies had become an essential part of Queen's signature sound, and how his backing vocals had lifted Freddie's lead to new heights. Finally, his thoughts settled on John Deacon, the quiet genius who had joined them last but had quickly become indispensable. John had always been the most private member of Queen Dance, preferring to let his bass line speak for him, but Freddie had always understood John's value, how his steady presence and musical intuition had grounded their more experimental impulses. John's bass hadn't just provided rhythm, it had provided soul, the deep foundation that allowed the rest of them to soar. In the letter, Freddie wrote about John's humility, how he had never sought the spotlight, but had been content to be the engine that drove their musical machine. He wrote about John's dry sense of humor, the way he could deflate tension with a perfectly timed observation or a subtle smile. Most importantly, he wrote about John's loyalty, how he had remained steadfast through all of Queen's evolution, adapting his style to serve whatever musical direction they chose to explore. As the afternoon light began to fade, Freddie realized he was writing not just a goodbye, but a love letter to 20 years of shared dreams, shared struggles, and shared triumphs. Each word carried the weight of a lifetime spent creating something beautiful together, something that would outlive them all. As evening shadows began to creep across the walls of Garden Lodge, Freddie paused in his writing, overwhelmed by the flood of memories that each sentence seemed to unlock. The letter had become more than just words on paper. It was transforming into a repository of 2 decades worth of shared experiences, each memory more precious than any platinum record or sold-out stadium. His mind wandered to the countless hours they had spent together in recording studios around the world, crafting the songs that would define not just their careers, but the very essence of rock music itself. He remembered the creation of Bohemian Rhapsody, how the 4 of them had looked at him, with a mixture of confusion and fascination when he first presented his 6-minute operatic rock epic. The conventional wisdom of the music industry had declared it commercial suicide. Too long, too complex, too different. But Brian, Roger, and John had trusted his vision completely, throwing themselves into the intricate harmonies and complex arrangements with the same passion that Freddie felt. Those marathon recording sessions at Rockfield Studios had been magical, each of them contributing something essential to what would become their masterpiece. In his letter, Freddie wrote about how their faith in his unconventional ideas had given him the courage to push boundaries throughout their career. He wrote about "We Will Rock You" and how Roger's thunderous drums had created a rhythm that could unite entire stadiums in a single heartbeat. He wrote about "Another One Bites the Dust" and how John's funky bass line had opened new musical territories for them, proving that Queen could master any genre they chose to explore. He wrote about "We Are the Champions" and how Brian's soaring guitar had provided the perfect backdrop for what would become an anthem of triumph and perseverance. But beyond the hit songs and commercial successes, Freddie found himself writing about the smaller moments that had meant just as much. He wrote about the way they would look at each other during live performances, communicating entire conversations with just a glance. He wrote about their pre-show rituals, how they would gather in a circle before taking the stage, drawing strength from each other's presence. He wrote about the way they had protected each other from the pressures of fame, creating a bubble of normalcy and friendship in the midst of the chaos that surrounded them. The letter began to reveal Freddie's deepest fears and regrets. He wrote about the times his ego had gotten in the way of their collaboration, when his desire for perfection had pushed them all to their limits. He wrote about his solo career and how, despite its artistic merits, it had created distance between them that he now deeply regretted. He had always been driven by an insatiable need to explore every facet of his creativity, but he realized now that Queen had always been his true home, the place where his artistic vision found its most complete expression. As he continued writing, Freddie's thoughts turned to their legendary Live Aid performance, the 20 minutes that had reminded the world why Queen was considered one of the greatest live acts in rock history. He wrote about the electricity he had felt that day at Wembley Stadium, how the four of them had connected with the audience and with each other in a way that transcended mere entertainment. That performance had been the culmination of everything they had worked toward, a perfect synthesis of their individual talents, creating something greater than the sum of its parts. The letter also carried his gratitude for their discretion and loyalty during his illness. They had known about his condition long before the public, and they had never once made him feel like a burden or treated him with the pity he had feared. Instead, they had continued to work with him, to create with him, to believe in the music they were making together, even as his body grew weaker. The clock on Freddie's mantelpiece chimed softly as midnight approached, but sleep was the furthest thing from his mind. The letter had grown longer than he had initially intended, each paragraph revealing layers of emotion he hadn't even realized he was carrying. His hand moved across the paper with increasing urgency now, as if he feared running out of time to say everything that needed to be said. The weight of unspoken words from 20 years of friendship pressed down on him, demanding to be released onto the page. He found himself writing about the evolution of their relationship, how they had grown from four ambitious young men into a family bound by something deeper than blood. In the early days, they had been united by their shared hunger for success, their determination to prove that Queen could be something special in a music world, dominated by established acts. But somewhere along the way, that professional partnership had transformed into something more profound, a brotherhood that had weathered every storm the music industry could throw at them. Freddie wrote about their creative process, how each album had been like giving birth to a new version of themselves. He remembered the heated discussions about musical direction, the passionate arguments that sometimes lasted for hours, but always ended with them finding a solution that none of them could have reached alone. Brian's analytical mind would dissect every arrangement, Roger's instincts would push them toward bolder choices, and John's quiet wisdom would often provide the missing piece that made everything click into place. The letter revealed Freddie's deep appreciation for how they had handled his increasingly flamboyant stage persona and lifestyle choices. In an era when rock stars were expected to conform to certain masculine stereotypes, his bandmates had never once asked him to tone down his theatrical nature or hide his true self. They had embraced his vision of Queen as a band that could be both musically sophisticated and wildly entertaining, understanding that his larger-than-life personality was not separate from their music, but an integral part of it. He wrote about their tours, the countless nights spent in hotel rooms around the world, sharing stories and dreams and fears. Those quiet moments between the chaos of performances had been when their friendship had deepened beyond the professional realm. He remembered conversations about their families, their hopes for the future, their struggles with the pressures of fame. Brian would talk about his passion for astronomy, Roger would share his concerns about the music industry's direction, and John would offer his dry observations about the absurdity of their rock star existence. The letter also carried Freddie's regrets about the times when his perfectionism had created tension within the group. He wrote about recording sessions that had stretched on for months because he couldn't accept anything less than absolute perfection, about his tendency to dominate creative decisions when collaboration might have yielded better results. He had always been driven by an almost obsessive need to push Queen to greater heights, but he realized now that his intensity had sometimes overshadowed the contributions of his bandmates. As he continued writing, Freddie found himself addressing each of them individually within the letter, acknowledging their unique contributions not just to Queen's music, but to his personal growth as an artist and as a human being. He wrote about how Brian's intellectual curiosity had challenged him to think more deeply about their lyrics and compositions. He wrote about how Roger's rebellious spirit had given him permission to take bigger risks on stage and in the studio. He wrote about how John's steady presence had provided the stability that allowed the rest of them to explore their more experimental impulses. The letter was becoming a testament to the power of creative collaboration, a recognition that Queen's greatest achievements had come not from any individual talent, but from the mysterious alchemy that occurred when the four of them worked together. Each song, each album, each performance had been a conversation between four distinct voices, creating harmonies that none of them could have imagined alone. As dawn began to break over London, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold, Freddie realized he had been writing through the entire night. His body ached from sitting in the same position for hours, but his spirit felt lighter with each word he committed to paper. The letter had become a cathartic journey through his memories, allowing him to process emotions he had kept buried for years. Now, as he approached what he knew would be the most difficult part of his message, he paused to gather his strength for the words that would hurt the most to write. The hardest truth he had to convey was his acceptance of what was coming. For months, he had fought against the reality of his diagnosis, clinging to hope and maintaining the facade that everything would somehow return to normal. But in the quiet honesty of this letter, he could no longer pretend. He wrote about his gratitude for the extra time his illness had given him to appreciate what truly mattered, how facing mortality had stripped away all the superficial concerns that had once seemed so important. He found himself writing about legacy, not in terms of record sales or chart positions, but in terms of the music they had created together and what it would mean to future generations. Queen's songs had always been about more than entertainment. They had been anthems of empowerment, celebrations of individuality, and declarations that it was not only acceptable, but essential to be different. He wrote about his hope that their music would continue to inspire people to embrace their authentic selves, just as his bandmates had allowed him to embrace his. The letter revealed Freddie's deep concern for what would happen to Queen after he was gone. He had watched other bands struggle to continue after losing a key member, and he knew that his voice had been such an integral part of their sound that replacing him would be impossible. But he also knew that Brian, Rogers and John were too talented, too passionate about music to simply stop creating. He wrote about his hope that they would find new ways to express their artistry, whether together or separately, and that they would not feel bound by the past or guilty about moving forward. In perhaps the most personal section of the letter, Freddie wrote about his fears and vulnerabilities. Despite his confident stage persona, he had always struggled with deep insecurities about his appearance, his background, and his worthiness of the love and admiration he received. His bandmates had been the first people to see past his carefully constructed image and accept him completely, flaws and all. Their friendship had taught him that he was valuable not because of what he could do for others, but simply because of who he was. He wrote about the small kindnesses they had shown him over the years, Roger's protective instincts during difficult interviews, Brian's patient explanations of complex musical concepts, John's quiet support during his most self-doubting moments. These gestures had meant more to him than any standing ovation or critical acclaim, because they had come from people who knew him intimately and chose to love him anyway. The letter also carried his wishes for their personal lives beyond music. He wrote about his hope that Brian would continue pursuing his passion for astronomy, that Roger would find new creative outlets for his boundless energy, and that John would have the peaceful family life he had always cherished. He wanted them to know that their happiness mattered to him more than any professional considerations, that their friendship had always been more important than their collaboration. As the morning light grew stronger, Freddie prepared to write the final section of his letter, knowing that these last words would be the most important of all. The morning sun now streamed fully through the windows of Garden Lodge, illuminating the pages scattered across Freddie's desk like golden spotlights on a stage. His letter had grown into something far more substantial than he had originally envisioned. It had become a memoir of friendship, a testament to creative partnership, and a love letter to the three men who had shared his greatest journey. As he prepared to write what he knew would be the final section, his hands trembled not from weakness, but from the overwhelming emotion of trying to capture a lifetime of gratitude in mere words. He began this concluding portion by writing about the music that would outlive them all. Queen's catalogue had become the soundtrack to countless lives around the world, providing comfort to the lonely, strength to the struggling, and joy to those celebrating life's victories. He wrote about how proud he was that their songs had transcended cultural and generational boundaries, becoming anthems that united people across every conceivable divide. But more than the commercial success or critical acclaim, he was proud that their music had always remained true to their vision of what rock and roll could be: theatrical, emotional, and unapologetically bold. The letter revealed Freddie's deep understanding of what Queen had meant to each of his bandmates individually. For Brian, it had been a platform to combine his love of science with his passion for music, creating guitar sounds that were both technically innovative and emotionally powerful. For Roger, it had provided an outlet for his fierce independence and creative energy, allowing him to explore every facet of his musical personality. For John, it had been a family where his quiet genius could flourish without the pressure of constant spotlight, where his contributions were valued and essential. As he wrote about their final recording sessions together, Freddie's emotions threatened to overwhelm him. Those last months in the studio had been bittersweet, filled with the knowledge that they were creating something precious and finite. Every take, every harmony, every shared laugh had carried extra weight because they all understood, without ever speaking it aloud, that these might be their last creative moments together. Yet despite the sadness that hung over those sessions, the music they had created was some of their most beautiful and honest work. He wrote about his hopes for how they would remember him, not as the larger-than-life performer who commanded stadiums, but as their friend who had shared their dreams and supported their individual journeys. He wanted them to remember the quiet moments between the chaos, the conversations that had nothing to do with music, the times when they had simply been four friends navigating the strange world of rock stardom together. Those memories, he believed, were more valuable than any of their professional achievements. The letter also carried his final wishes for Queen's legacy. He wrote about his hope that their music would continue to inspire future generations of artists to take risks, to be authentic, and to never compromise their vision for commercial considerations. He wanted Queen to be remembered as a band that had proven that intelligence and theatricality could coexist, that rock music could be both sophisticated and accessible, and that the most important ingredient in any artistic endeavor was the courage to be completely yourself. In his final paragraphs, Freddie wrote about love, the word that had always been difficult for him to express directly, but that permeated every aspect of his relationship with his bandmates. He wrote about how their friendship had taught him that love came in many forms, and that the bond between creative collaborators could be just as profound and lasting as any romantic relationship. They had been his chosen family, his artistic soulmates, and his greatest source of joy and pride. As Freddie approached the final words of his letter, the weight of 20 years seemed to settle around him like a familiar embrace. The pages before him told the story of Queen, but more importantly, they told the story of four men who had found something rare and precious in each other, a creative partnership that had transcended the typical boundaries of professional collaboration to become something approaching the sacred. His pen hovered over the paper as he searched for the perfect way to conclude this final communication with the people who had meant everything to him. He wrote about the moment he had first realized that Queen was more than just a band. It had been during one of their early recording sessions when a simple disagreement about a chord progression had turned into an hours-long exploration of musical possibilities. Instead of ego clashing with ego, their different perspectives had created something none of them could have imagined alone. That moment had taught him that true collaboration required not just talent, but trust, respect, and the willingness to surrender individual control for the sake of something greater. The letter revealed Freddie's understanding that their greatest achievement had not been any single song or album, but the creation of a musical language that was uniquely theirs. Queen's sound had evolved over the years, incorporating elements of rock, opera, and funk and pop, but it had always remained unmistakably Queen because of the chemistry between the four of them. That chemistry had been their secret weapon, the thing that had set them apart from every other band of their era and made their music timeless. He wrote about his gratitude for the way they had handled his increasingly private nature in recent years. As his illness had progressed, he had withdrawn from many of the social aspects of their career, preferring to focus his limited energy on the music itself. His bandmates had understood this instinctively, never pressuring him to participate in activities that drained him, always respecting his need for privacy while continuing to include him in every creative decision. Their sensitivity had allowed him to maintain his dignity while still contributing to the band he loved. In these final paragraphs, Freddie addressed the practical matters that would need attention after his death. He wrote about his hope that they would take time to grieve, to process the loss, and to decide carefully about Queen's future. He did not want them to feel obligated to continue the band if it no longer brought them joy, nor did he want them to feel guilty if they chose to pursue new musical directions. His only request was that they remember the love and passion that had driven Queen from the beginning, and that they honor that spirit in whatever they chose to do next. The letter also carried his final thoughts about their individual friendships. He wrote to Brian about their shared love of pushing musical boundaries and his admiration for Brian's intellectual curiosity. He wrote to Roger about their creative tensions that had always resulted in better music, and his respect for Roger's unwavering artistic integrity. He wrote to John about their quiet understanding and his appreciation for John's steady presence that had anchored them all through the chaos of their career. As he prepared to sign his name to this final message, Freddie reflected on the privilege of having lived the life he had chosen. Despite the pain of his current situation, he felt overwhelming gratitude for the experiences he had shared with Queen, for the music they had created together, and for the friendship that had sustained him through every triumph and challenge. The letter had become his final gift to them, not just his words of goodbye, but his complete honesty about what their friendship had meant to him. With trembling hands that had once commanded the attention of millions, Freddie Mercury prepared to write the final words of what would become the most heartbreaking document in rock history. The morning light had grown stronger, casting long shadows across the pages that contained his soul laid bare. 24 hours earlier, this had been just another day in his increasingly quiet life at Garden Lodge. Now, it had become the day he said goodbye to the three men who had shared his greatest adventure. The final paragraph began with the simplest yet most profound truth he had ever written. After decades of elaborate stage productions, complex musical arrangements, and theatrical performances that had redefined what rock music could be, Freddie found himself returning to the most basic human emotion of all. He wrote about love, not the passionate, consuming love of his songs, but the steady, enduring love of true friendship. He told Brian, Roger, and John that loving them had been the greatest privilege of his life, greater than any standing ovation, any platinum record, or any moment of stage magic they had created together. He wrote about his final wish for them, that they would remember him not in his weakened state, but as he had been in their greatest moments together. He wanted them to remember him commanding the stage at Wembley, lost in the creative process during late-night recording sessions, laughing until tears streamed down his face at Roger's terrible jokes, debating musical arrangements with Brian until dawn, and sharing comfortable silences with John that spoke volumes about their understanding of each other. The letter revealed Freddie's deepest hope, that Queen's music would continue to bring joy to the world long after all of them were gone. He wrote about his belief that their songs had captured something eternal, something that transcended the individual personalities who had created them. Bohemian Rhapsody, We Will Rock You, Somebody to Love, and all the rest had become more than just Queen songs. They had become part of the human experience, providing soundtrack to countless lives and memories around the world. As he approached his final sentences, Freddie's thoughts turned to the mystery of what came next. Despite his flamboyant public persona, he had always been a deeply private person when it came to matters of faith and mortality. But in this letter, he allowed himself to express a quiet hope that somehow, somewhere, the four of them would make music together again. Whether in memory, in the hearts of their fans, or in some realm beyond human understanding, he believed that the bond they had forged was too strong to be broken by something as temporary as death. The last paragraph was the shortest, but carried the weight of everything that had come before. Freddie wrote about gratitude, for the music, for the friendship, for the privilege of having lived a life filled with creativity and passion. He thanked them for accepting him completely, for believing in his wildest visions, and for standing by him through every challenge their career had presented. Most importantly, he thanked them for showing him what it meant to be part of something greater than himself. With tears streaming down his face, Freddie signed his name at the bottom of the letter with the same flourish he had used to sign autographs for millions of fans around the world. But this signature was different. It was not Freddie Mercury the rock star, but Farrokh Bulsara the friend, saying goodbye to the people who had known him best and loved him most. The letter was complete. In a few days, it would be delivered to Brian May, Roger Taylor, and John Deacon, carrying with it the final words of the man who had been the voice of Queen. And in reading those words, they would understand that while Freddie Mercury, the performer, was gone, the love and friendship they had shared would echo through eternity, just like their music. Thank you for watching another episode of Untold Stories of Freddie Mercury. If you enjoyed today's story, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming emotional and inspiring tales about Freddie's life and legacy. Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one, and often your ideas inspire our next episode. See you next time.